Hello, my name is Jordan Tucker, and this is my second presentation for the copyright assignment. This one is going over the Assure model and how I applied it in my previous presentation. So Assure is an acronym, and the very first letter stands for Analyze Learners. To analyze learners, you need to address general characteristics, specific entry competencies, and learning differences. To know and understand the characteristics of the students I'm teaching in the library, I would have to discuss the needs with the teacher beforehand, make quick impressions of the students as they come in, and use my own prior knowledge of them through interactions that I may have had. This just speaks to how important it is for librarians to be super involved in the school community. As far as specific entry competencies, the fact that the teacher asked for this type of lesson speaks to the prior knowledge of the students, which means I need to make this lesson as basic as possible while still getting the point across. The entry competencies for this lesson were that students understand the definitions of possession and create. Basically, they need to know what it means to own something and what it means to create something. They also need to know cause and effect, and how that breaking the law leads to a fine and how creating something leads to it being protected. As far as learning differences, the biggest problem educators face in teaching is teaching to vastly different people in one room. I was told to teach to every learning type. In this presentation, I included visuals, writings, audio, and the assignment at the end included a brief hands-on piece. The other challenge is to make sure no one is left behind while I'm teaching, unless I discuss with the teacher beforehand which students may have learning disabilities. I will have to make this adjustment last minute. This type of flexibility is valued among educators. With differently abled students in a class, you have to tune in if your students are understanding you correctly or not. This can be done by asking questions throughout a lecture. The second letter of Assure stands for State Your Standards and Objectives. For this lesson, my objectives are listed on the second slide. However, I was taught using the Assure model in undergrad with the focus on stating objectives, but they taught us to never state your full objective to the students. So, my audience. In my lesson plans, I state that students will be able to, indicating my audience is my students. Behavior. In this lesson, I had students identify, evaluate, define, explain, and present. Conditions. My intention for these objectives was that students fulfilled them using the information I provided and to explain things in their own words. For a degree, I want students to be able to define copyright with a 95% accuracy, identify 3 out of the 4 criteria for fair use, have 90% accurate description of copyright, and present correct citation 98% of the time. I normally do not have such high expectations in the degree. However, with this topic, if it is not perfect, it could have serious repercussions. Just like with a safety test, you want students to be able to answer with 100% accuracy. The third letter in Assure stands for Select Strategies and Resources. The format of this lesson had to be lecture discussion without discussion, just by necessity. If I had the opportunity to give this lesson to a real group of students, I would include more discussion points. I designed this lesson around the idea that I would be giving it in the computer lab section of a library. This way students could see and hear my lesson and then dive in to practicing the content. Resources I used for this lesson were primarily Chapter 1 of the Instructional Technology and Media for Learning textbook. I supplemented this information from knowledge gleaned from the U.S. Copyright Office website. As far as other resources, I would work with the teacher or invite other teachers to join in and see what they specifically want their students to know, and we can work together on designing lessons and materials. The fourth letter in ASSURE stands for Utilize Resources. There are 5 P's to utilizing resources. The first is preview the resources. I read the chapter from the textbook as well as multiple documents from the U.S. Copyright Office website. I also studied the definition and content on Wikipedia for a more natural language explanation before I dove into the legal terms. Prepare resources. After that, I made a skeleton of a presentation with the slide titles I wanted and the topics I wanted to cover. After going back and forth, I created a presentation explaining the copyright law and the fair use doctrine and accompanying audio. Next is to prepare the environment. Although I'm not in a school setting, this step was still very applicable. To make a proper recording, I made sure my devices were silenced and that it was as quiet as possible. I made sure I had what I wanted to say on my phone so that papers were not making background noise. I even took a moment to drink water so my throat would not be dry while I was speaking. Before I began to record, I also did a test run and practiced video editing on the test run. The next step is to prepare the learners. This step I've struggled with due to not having the learners right in front of me. Typically in a classroom, I can see when they are not ready to learn. I did try to include some motivation near the beginning when I talked about the repercussions of copyright infringement, such as $750 fines. If I was teaching to a group of freshman college students, I would have gone into even further detail, such as your assignment will not be accepted. The last step is providing learning experiences. This learning experience was provided by means of a presentation. For the sake of time, I attempted to keep my presentation between 10 and 20 minutes. However, if granted more time, I would have also done a shared screen through Zoom and walked them through finding a source, inserting it into a paper, and correctly citing it. The fifth letter in ASSURE stands for Require Learner Participation. For this presentation, I predominantly used practice as the learner participation. I included some examples with my presentation, but following the lesson I provided, there were 5 questions for the students to answer. Another way I thought of requiring learner participation was to have them find information to answer questions and cite the source correctly in the same fashion I answer my information hunts in my Info 5600 class. However, following the first 3 questions, instead of evaluating a source, they would evaluate the process of citing their work. For example, they would answer, how easy or difficult was it to cite your source? What resources did you use to cite? And so on. This would provide students with more of the feedback aspect of participation. The last letter in ASSURE stands for Evaluate and Revised. I have written in a few of the ways I would revise this lesson regarding each letter of the ASSURE model in previous slides. Overall, I would teach more to students' individual needs. I would build time in to check in with each student as they answer the questions at the end, and I would state my objectives in a clearer manner so that my students know my expectations. Thank you.